This podcast is part of the Pull Up a Chair podcast network. Let's build community through connection, conversation, and collaboration. This podcast is sponsored by Ep11 Consulting, editing with a purpose. Check them out at ep11consulting.com for a free consultation.
What does it mean to be happy? 'Cause it looks like we all don't know. Glass half full or empty. Man, we just putting on the show.
Welcome to How's That Working For You Season 2. It's your girls Kat and V, but this time we're taking deeper dives into mental health and breaking stigmas. So get ready because things are about to get real and personal. How's That Working For You is a passion project created with the intention of creating space and awareness around mental health topics that are often hard to talk about. We are not professionals in the field of mental health, but we speak from our own personal experience and thoroughly conduct our own research to help educate others on why it's important to join this conversation. Hey V, what's up?
Hey Kat, I just wanted to take a moment to talk about physical disabilities and how it relates to mental illness.
Awesome.
Before I jump in, I think I should talk about terminology real quick because there's a lot of misunderstanding around what the term disabled actually means. It's a huge umbrella term and it just means somebody who isn't as physically capable as the average person. There's two broad categories of disabilities. There's mental impairments, which means there's something in your brain that's making you not as mentally capable as other people. And then there's physical disabilities, which are a little bit more widely understood. Mm-hmm. And within that, there's spectrums for every type of disability. I myself have quite a few, but thankfully all my cases are pretty mild and I appear as somebody able-bodied. An able-bodied just means an average person with nothing quote-unquote wrong with them. So just wanted to get that out of the way. That being said, I, took a little time to do a little research, and according to the CDC, an individual with a disability is 5 times more likely than the average able-bodied person to have a serious mental illness.
Oh.
Now, they didn't define what they meant by serious mental illness, so I'm just going to assume it means something a little bit more drastic than just generalized anxiety, but I can't say for sure what they meant because they didn't say.
Very vague.
Yeah. I read another study that talked about the reason for this most likely being the extra difficulties that people with disabilities have, and like I said earlier, disabilities, huge umbrella term, so what people struggle with will vary widely. I'm going to use myself as an example, so sorry if you don't want to hear more about me, but you're going to hear more about me. So, I have 2 main disabilities. I have a learning disability. I am dyslexic. I am pretty badly dyslexic at that. Kat can contest to this because this poor girl has had to edit everything from my name to the word "the" when I type it out. And so people with dyslexia, like me, often have to get school accommodations, which we're going to talk about in more detail in a future episode. Some people with dyslexia aren't able to get through school as well as others, and it holds them back, and that can cause confidence issues, that can cause self-esteem issues, and a whole slew of other things. But I think the more interesting thing to talk about today would be my cerebral palsy, which is a physical disability that I was born with. Now, when it comes to disabilities, there's 2 main ways to be disabled. There's an acquired disability, something that happens from an accident, something that happens later on in life. And then there's congenital disabilities. Congenital disabilities is something that you are born with. Both of my disabilities I was born with. I was born with cerebral palsy, but I wasn't diagnosed until I was 7.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, like it was way later in life because I have such a mild case, but even with a quote unquote mild case, I am disabled. There's a lot that people can do that I can't do.
Yeah.
They diagnosed me that I have cerebral palsy after doing a CAT scan because I was having difficulty walking. As a child, I didn't want to go on play structures as often as kids. If we were out at a park, I would stop and take a lot of breaks, and I walk funny. I walk on my tippy toes, and I kind of do a wobble when I walk. And that's because cerebral palsy is a birth defect that causes growth development issues. For me, it resulted in my muscles not keeping pace with my bone structure and my bone structure not developing correctly. So I am missing a couple of ribs that just decided not to grow in, which caused me to have a smaller lung capacity, which is why I have such a little bitty waist.
Oh my gosh. Oh no.
And they're not as big as they should be, which is why I look like I have the littlest waist. When I don't have fat on me, the circumference of my waist is 31 inches.
Very small.
For a woman of my height, it should be at least
very
34.
Small.
So it looks like I have a little tiny waist. But it's just because they didn't develop correctly, which means
Good for you, though. There's some perk there.
Well, it caused me to have asthma because my lungs couldn't get as big as they should have been. So my lungs are too small.
Yeah, so maybe
my
not.
My heart is a little bit smaller than it should be. But my stomach and my guts are fine because they're not in my rib cage. So I'm happy about that because I love me some food.
That's so funny. Oh my God. Can you imagine?
I don't want to think about if I couldn't fill my stomach up the way I fill my stomach up. Food is my happy place.
I was going to say, I was like, whoa.
And then the other area, which was more concerning for my grandmother, was my leg muscles are drastically smaller than they should be, which causes me to have that funny way that I walked. And I think I was 8, and I was trying to keep up with my, at the time, teenage older sister and her friends when they went to an amusement park. And I ended the day tearing a muscle. I sprained another muscle. I was in extreme amounts of pain. And she was thinking, how could an 8-year-old child not be able to keep pace with teenagers? Like, an 8-year-old child should have more energy than a teenager.
Yeah.
So that's when she started getting me into all these doctor's appointments and whatnot. And eventually I got a CAT scan, and they discovered, the part of her brain that controls development is not functioning correctly. And that's, so she has cerebral palsy. Until I was 19, I was in physical therapy 3 times a week, every single week. And it was painful. Gosh. I had several operations, leaving me with some scars on my legs. But looking at me now as an adult, I am still able to walk, which is a lot more than a lot of people with cerebral palsy can do. Most people with my condition are in wheelchairs, and I would have been in a wheelchair if it wasn't for the health care that I got as a child. I was told at 13 that I was going to be in a wheelchair before my 20s, and to just be mentally prepared for that. I still can't walk very well. Like, full disclosure, I know I should be walking with leg braces, but I don't, because I don't have to, as long as I am careful. And so I don't wear my leg braces like I should, which would just give me that extra support. But I didn't
know that you had to.
I should. I don't have to, but I should. And I don't. I'm just careful about the length of time that I walk and how long I'm on my feet. And if I push myself, I will end the day so swollen that I won't be able to take off my own shoes, which is very pathetic. And because of that, I have all these random obstacles, like going to the grocery store. I have to make sure that I park close enough that I'm still able to walk around the whole grocery store without needing to stop to sit down. And especially right now, a lot of the public seating areas are not open for the public to sit down. So I'm not given the opportunity to rest that I need to get, which makes just being out in the world right now so much harder. And even still, before this all happened, there's not a lot of places at like grocery stores or just out at places you'd run errands for a person like me to stop and rest. And then I also look very able-bodied, which we'll talk about in a future episode, visible disabilities versus invisible disabilities, because that's a whole slew of issues in and of itself.
Right.
But because of my disability, and this is something that comes up with a lot of mobile impaired people, it's hard for us to get out and be part of the social world at large. And because of that, a lot of us develop stress, anxiety, depression, because we're not able to interact with the world the way most people can. And it's stressful and it's painful.
Oh no, I feel like that's like very clear for like athletes who get injured, right? Where like they get so like depressed because they can't do what they love. I mean, that's like on a more severe case, right?
Yeah, like that's the perfect example of something that happens to acquired disabilities, people who had the ability to do it. I think, let me look at the stats. According to the CDC, a person who acquired a disability later in life are up to 7 times more likely than a still able-bodied person to have a serious mental illness, whatever they mean by serious mental illness.
I mean, they should have listed.
They had a list of the most common mental issues, but as all mental illnesses are, it's a spectrum. So I'm sure they just mean further down the spectrum than most people. Another thing people with acquired disabilities struggle with is grief, because you're grieving the life that you had before. And yeah, nobody died, probably. You don't just grieve for a dead person. You can also grieve for a lifestyle, for something that you love that is no longer doable. Yeah. And of course, PTSD, that wonderful little...
You're very familiar with that one.
Yeah.
I have a little bit of it, but it's not because of a physical accident. But like PTSD is never fun.
Oh my God, never ever. And then on top of that, there is like, let's say a person with a disability is able to like get out and be in the world at large. They have a lot of stigmas attached to them, especially cases where it's like a severe physical limitation where you can see the disability on them. A lot of people will assume, oh, they're physically disabled, therefore they're mentally disabled, which isn't always the case. I know with cerebral palsy, my mental impairments are completely separate than my cerebral palsy. My cerebral palsy did not cause any of my other issues.
But I know for a fact that a lot of people think that people with cerebral palsy are mentally disabled instead of physically disabled.
Which is frustrating because, yeah, somebody autistic could have been born with cerebral palsy, but it's not because of the cerebral palsy that they have their mental impairments. And then it works the other way around. Somebody who has mental impairments might not have any physical ones. They might look like a completely normal person, and you go up and you say something to them and they're not able to respond. And there's just this weird assumption that all physical disabilities are the same and are interconnected. And that's not at all the case. And there's a lot of discrimination against a person with a disability. And some of it, I'm not going to say is justified, but some of it makes sense. Like, you shouldn't hire me for a job where I'm expected to be on my feet for 8 hours. That's just not going to work. So I get not getting that job. But other jobs where a disability wouldn't hinder me being a good employee shouldn't be something that's discriminated against, but is often discriminated against just because they can, because they're like, I would prefer to have somebody who looks and behaves normally than somebody who doesn't. And then that's also an issue with dating. I remember I was once having an issue. I would say this was like the first quote unquote date with the guy. I didn't know him very well, but he wanted to go walk around San Francisco. And I said, okay, that's fine. That's great. That sounds like fun. But you have to know I'm going to have to take a lot of breaks. And he's all like, well, just don't wear high heels.
Oh, no.
And I told him, it's like, oh, it's not that. I have cerebral palsy and I can't be on my feet for too long. And he's all like, well, you should have disclosed that earlier. I don't want to be with a person that could produce a disabled kid. I was all like, okay, first off,
it's not genetic, is it?
No, it's not. It's a birth defect.
Oh my gosh. Oh no.
There's many reasons a person would be born with cerebral palsy, and there's like many reasons a person would have XYZ physical disability. So it's not like all of them are hereditary. Some of them are.
That's so rude, though.
And it's just not like, there's so many ways he could have said that, but the fact that he was so ignorant to my disability.
Matter of fact, like,
and it's just,
I don't want to be with somebody disabled. Like, what?
As well, like, you thought I was cute earlier, cute enough to ask me out, but now all of a sudden it's an issue.
That's very rude. Like, wow. I can't. Did you slap him?
Like,
did you slap him? Like,
I laughed at him. I was so shocked because I get discriminated against for other things all the time.
Right.
But I've never had somebody just so forthright, like, ew, disabled.
It's like not, first of all, it's not socially acceptable to do that.
That didn't affect my self-esteem. But because I walk funny, it's something when I was younger, I used to be very embarrassed about. And my physical therapist encouraged my family to correct my walking whenever possible, which was important at the time. But to this day, if I so much as step wrong or funny, everybody in the family will be like, hey, watch yourself. That's not correct. That's not the correct way of walking.
You mean your aunts?
My aunts, my grandfathers, my siblings, even my husband does it. And he does? You know, it's good. It's good for me to be cautious of my steps. But sometimes I just want to go pee in the quickest way possible to get me from point A to point Z. And I don't want to be corrected when I'm...
It's just to walk the way that you walk.
Yeah. And, you know, it's important for me to be cautious. But at the same time, it is exhausting.
Well, as long as you don't hurt yourself, right? Like... I mean, I understand, like, the importance of, like, correct posture. I mean, I'm a yoga instructor, so I get it. But, like, it's not, I don't know. I feel like you shouldn't be scrutinized for, like, the way that you step into the bathroom. Like, I don't think anybody should be.
Personally, I feel like there's a time and place to correct me.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't be every second of every day. Because I'm not going to always be perfect every second of every day. And because I'm disabled, there's this expectation that if I want to be normal, I have to work 100% of the time. And I'm never not going to have cerebral palsy. Never.
We hate that word, normal. We don't hate it, but it's not like, it's not, I don't know. What is normal anyway? But I don't know. I mean, like, even for me, like we've discussed before, we weren't super close, but like, I didn't really notice it until like probably like a few months into knowing you, that you even had like a different way of walking. So it was one day when I was like curious and we talked about like my bringing it up, but like it could have been like, oh, you were sore from last night or something. Like it's not, I don't know. It shouldn't be something to be discriminated or like scoffed at.
It's interesting that you say that because there's this whole idea around if you're able to hide it, you might as well not be disabled. And that's not necessarily true. I know like within the quote unquote disabled community, because there's, you know, support groups for everything nowadays, that if you're able to be viewed as somebody able-bodied, you're more worthy. There's like this weird hierarchy that if you're not mentally impaired, you're just an overall not better person, but like more evolved person.
So like I was looking on at TikTok and I saw this girl who's deaf, and she speaks pretty clearly for someone who's deaf, and she was talking about how like people will say like, oh wow, you talk so clearly for someone who's deaf, like you must have done like, and she's just like, yeah, like I had years of therapy and like my parents paid for it and it was all this stuff. And then people will like continue to say like, oh well, like yes, other deaf people don't talk as good as you, and they'll like kind of bash those like other deaf people. And then she's like, no, well, I was actually very privileged. My parents could pay for this therapy. I didn't just like all of a sudden was able to talk the way that I can talk. And it just like kind of brings to light that it's like, if somebody who's disabled is a little more able than somebody else, it's not just because like they were born more able, like they also worked really hard to get there too, or they were more privileged to have that.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, the therapy. And it reminded me of when you talked to me about how your grandmother and father really poured a lot of energy and love and like actual money into your like therapy to get to walk the way that you do. So it's like, it's not like it. I just wanted to bring that to light because like it is a very like, I think some able-bodied people like, and I think the term is ableist when they say things that are like insensitive.
Yes. Correct term.
Yeah. Yeah. So like some able-bodied people are just ableist and they don't understand that like you can't, just because you compliment one disabled person doesn't mean that you're not saying something totally insensitive to somebody who is also disabled, just didn't have the right resources to get better or whatever, you know?
Yeah, and even with that, there's some disabilities or some like on the further end of the spectrum where no matter how much you pour into them, they'll never look and behave as an able-bodied person. Like they caught me when I was still young enough that they could extend my muscles to the point where I could walk. Now, if they didn't catch that until I was a teenager, I would not be able to live in a second-story apartment building. I would have not been able to walk down the aisle on my wedding day.
Wow.
And that's incredible. And then, like, if you looked at our university, because I don't know how we end up always talking about Dominican, there was only a few buildings. It sucks so bad. There was only a few buildings that I would have been able to even enter. And only a couple of dorm rooms I would have been able to live in, period, end of sentence. So if there was like 20 people like me applying for the school, they would have to pick and choose which disabled kid they'd want in there. And it's frustrating because I get that sometimes it's hard to accommodate for certain disabilities, especially if you're not mobile. Like, it's not always as easy as putting up a ramp, and you can't always add an elevator to stuff. So I get why some people just can't get certain accommodations, but at the same time, whenever you can, I don't get why people don't.
I mean, like, we pay enough tuition.
Oh my God, we paid so much tuition.
Oh, and you even talked about how, like, Dominican wouldn't even give you the handicap spot.
Yes.
Because you look so able-bodied or something, right?
Yep. We're going to get way into more detail in a future episode talking about visible versus invisible disabilities, because I am considered to have somebody with a quote-unquote invisible disability because I do look so normal.
To an extent, though. To an extent, because it's like it's very clear when you like need to take a break. No, not when you walk, but like when you need to take a break, you sit down. Like your husband, like by the end of the day, literally has to fucking like chisel your shoe off your foot because your foot's so swollen. Like I've seen it happen before. So it's like just because you like appear able-bodied doesn't mean that it doesn't affect your life like so drastically different than somebody who actually is able-bodied. And I didn't even learn this until we were like really close friends, that we had to like, and I was totally okay with it, like stopping and stuff like that. But I had no idea like the extent of which your disability like had to like, and required you to take breaks and stuff like that. It was new to me.
It's something that if I wanted to hide from people, I definitely could. But I feel like, not that it's dishonest, but I feel like because I can help educate people on what it's like to be disabled, I feel like I should. And then I know that you have another friend who we'll call Marcia, who has her own. Yes, we'll call her Marcia.
She'll love that.
Who has her own struggles because she has what I consider a more severe physical disability than I do. Because if I wanted to lay in bed all day and not feel any amount of pain, I could lay in bed all day and then I won't feel any amount of pain. But poor Marcia.
Oh gosh. So I got to know Marcia really well, and she's just like, oh my God, it's like, sometimes it's so exhausting just like watching her have to do just like such simple tasks. I'm just like, I'm so sorry, let me do that for you. But she's so like, no. She's very like, she doesn't want help from anybody. And that's like, and I'm just like, okay. And like what you were talking about before, she does have a lot of like mental, what is it called? Like they're more likely to have mental disorders. So she had like, yeah. So she had like lots of anxiety. And I think she talked about like, we're going to have to ask her to talk on our show someday because I may be botching some of the things she's saying. Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is what I think she has. So like, I think that's EDS is what she calls it. And it like, sometimes it makes some of her bones press onto her nerves because the ligaments between her joints is weaker and is weaker than normal. So sometimes like when the bones press on her nerves, she has like, sometimes she'll pass out. Sometimes like like she'll have like tons of anxiety because of it. Like sometimes it's so crazy. Sometimes watching her just like, because I took care of her. Well, I don't want to say I took care of her, but she needed somebody to kind of look out for her when the pandemic came down because it made her symptoms flare up so much. And she also had like issues at home. So I was just like, okay, come stay with me so I can at least like monitor you and help you with whatever you need. And there was one point where like I watched it happen. Her head just kind of slid forward on whatever was like supposed to be connecting her neck to her skull. Like it just slid forward and she started to cry. And then I was just like, okay, well, is there something you need? Like here. And I had to walk her to the floor, like to the yoga mat, and she had to lay down and she just broke down. She was just like, I can't, I don't know. I wanted to help her, but I couldn't because I was like, do I call the emergency room? Do I do what? Like, it's very interesting being around somebody who's like very newly aware of their disability. Cause it's like, what do we do? Like, she doesn't know if she needs to go to the emergency. And then she later, after this incident, realized that she's allergic to all these different things too, that make her bones and like, or not her bones, but her muscles inflamed and stuff like that. So if I had called the emergency that day, they could have given her something that would have like, that she could have been allergic to and she would have died. Like, so it was like, it was instances like that where I was just like, oh my God, Marsha, like what, I don't know, like, because she's such a beautiful human being and I really wanted to help her, but I couldn't do anything about it. Like, it was just, every time I get on the phone with her, I'm just so like in awe of how strong and just like mentally resilient and capable of a person she is. I'm just so floored by that because for someone who's born with that many issues or born with, I believe she's born with it. She didn't know about it because it didn't flare up until after the pandemic because she did a lot of hot yoga. And what she explained to me was like hot yoga made her sweat out whatever the toxins were causing her body to get so inflamed. So she didn't even have that many issues until the pandemic and she couldn't do hot yoga. She couldn't work out to like help build the muscle in between her bones and stuff like that. So I went on a tangent.
That's, it's fine. Because my experience is only my experience. I think it's important to hear about other people's experience. And
right. But it's secondhand.
Like I said, every time I hear about Marsha, it's like, yeah. So hopefully Marsha will come on. And if Marsha wants to say her actual first name, she can. Otherwise, she'll just be Mysterious Marsha.
Mysterious Marsha. I'll have to tell her about that. And I'll let you know if she wants. She did. I had asked her before and she did say that she's into it, but like, it's very, it's very, what's it called? Not like unclear, but like some days are better than others in terms of like how mentally capable she is of like doing stuff. Sometimes she's just too exhausted. Being long distance friends with her can be a little worrying, but it's okay. It's sometimes like you yesterday where you just didn't text me back all day and I was just like, oh my God. Was it yesterday? No, it was Monday. And I was just like, oh my God, is she okay? And then Jordan was sitting.
Oh, okay. I was all like,
no. Jordan was just like, you remember her family, right? Like literally anyone in her family could be blowing her up right now. And that's probably why she hasn't texted you back. But I was just like, but she always texts back. Last time she didn't text back, she was like almost on a ventilator in the hospital because she had the flu. Like what? There's a global pandemic. Like, I was just like, oh my God, where is she?
I'm also immunocompromised. So pre-pandemic, I caught just the regular run-of-the-mill flu. And yeah, I almost died because my body just decided it didn't want to fight off the flu. And it was pretty bad. There was like a few, I think like 4 or 5 days that I just straight up don't remember because the fever got too high and it's all sorts of bad. And so, being somebody who doesn't have a physical disability but lives and loves people who do, I can only imagine how stressful that is for you. Because for me, it's like, I'm in pain. I'm in a lot of pain, but I know I'm going to be fine.
What I truly love is how your husband just texted me back. It was just like, oh, she's sick. And I was like, oh, I mean, it did ease my worry. But then like later I found out that you were literally like dying. And I was just like, really? It's like, really? You're just going to say that she's sick? Like,
you're welcome.
your husband. He just is so able to diminish. Yeah, it's just like, oh my God. Anyway, keep going.
And so I guess the last thing we really want to touch on is the adjustment period, which I know that you'd like tapped on it when you were talking about Marsha, but especially people who acquire a disability later in life, eventually you have to learn how to live with said disability. Yeah. If you're not like diagnosed right away in life, you never have that. But myself learning that I was disabled in elementary school and being told that I have to chill it during recess and not being able to do, or well, being sent to PE class, but not being able to do all the PE stuff that my peers did, really like made me a target for bullying. And I know that if I found out later in life, the adjustment period would have been even worse because I would have lived my whole life injuring myself even worse and making it worse for myself. And then learning.
Oh, yeah, that's kind of what Marsha was telling me about, was like, she didn't even know that she was eating all these foods that were making her body even worse. Like until she got the allergy test. And then it was to the point where it was just like, can you tell me what foods you can eat? Like, that's how extensive her list of like food, allergies she has. And I was just like, oh my God. Yeah. So she was doing all these, like she was eating all this stuff that was making her even worse. And she didn't even realize she was, because she was able to counteract that with like yoga or working out, something like that. So that kind of like, she was talking to me about it. She was just like, it's kind of like a balance of like, sometimes the foods that she's allergic to are like, they kind of contradict each other. So she has to be like, okay, so which food should I eat that would be more beneficial to me, even though it's still going to make me feel like shit? Like that's the level of just how terrible her food allergies are. So it's just like, she's had to do this whole, like, she had to uproot everything. Like we used to eat a lot together. Like even before she found out all this stuff, like when at the beginning of the pandemic, we'd order food and like eat. And she'd eat sushi, she'd eat all these different things and it didn't matter to her. And now like she can only eat like carrots and meat. And like, I don't even know. It's just sometimes when she describes what she eats, it's just like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. She can't, the most interesting thing is that she can't have like nut butters or any like peanut oil, or olive oil, like plant-based oil. She has to have like clarified butter, which is called ghee. And then like some people would be like, oh, like because she's part of the yoga community, and I'm sure that if she, not sure, she wouldn't have to think a lot if she wanted to like be vegan, because the community that she's part of, she'd easily be able to go vegan if she wanted to, but she can't because her food, her, what is it called? Restrictions don't allow her to give up like animal fats, animal things. Cause that's like one of the only things that her body's able to process without killing her, basically. So.
And then everybody's journey to figuring out what their actual capabilities are looks different. Because for me, it's learning, okay, well, how far can I walk in what shoes and on what terrain before I need to stop and sit down? And how many breaks do I need before I have to be like, okay, this is the extent of my mobility today. And that's, it changes for my life. Like right now, I can't work out because I just spent the last week redoing my house. And so I kind of just spent my mobility points on that.
Which looks amazing, by the way.
Thank you.
Amazing. I know you've been sending me texts like periodically as you finish off an area of your house, and I'm just it looks like a completely different place.
So all this is just to say that if you are interacting with a person who's disabled, that doesn't mean you quite know what their capabilities are. And if you are somebody who is disabled, remember, just because you aren't as capable as other people in certain areas, it doesn't mean that you are worth any less than them. It doesn't mean that you're any less of a person, that you're any less of worthy of love or anything like that. You are perfect just the way you are. Know your capabilities and don't hurt yourself trying to push them.
What she said.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you haven't already, follow us over on Instagram at How's That Working For You. Check out our other podcasts and have an awesome rest of your day. We'll see you next week.
Mm-hmm.
Bye.
Bye.
I'm Patrick.
I'm Andrew. And I'm Christian.
And I'm Allie.
And we are Rad Theater, a podcast where a bunch of friends play role-playing games and share a single brain cell, and the GM doesn't always have it. Oh, and it's theater spelled the correct way, Theatre.